friends. Welcome to What Cat Reads. I'm Kat, for those who don't know me. I'm a wife, a homeschool mom, and an avid reader. This week, I kind of wanted to talk about some of those kind of vague suggestions, or vague's probably the wrong word, but those suggestions that we all give when we say, how to get out of a slump. One of those things that and this video is probably more for me than anyone else, but one of those things, or one of the suggestions, is always go to favorites. Reread a favorite. So this week I'm going to talk about some of my favorite kind of guilty pleasures almost of books that I love, but some of them are kind of trash. I mean, let's call it as it is. So I'm going to just talk about a few books that I kind of turn to in those slumps. The first one, I kind of have this divided into age group type books. So this first couple are going to be middle grades. And I always have, and I've already talked about these two. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is a constant go-to. I love it. The fantasy world that C.S. Lewis writes is amazing. Another one that I've already talked about in one of my previous videos is Harry Potter. Again, this is a series that just really allowed me to escape. As an escapist reader, that's very important to me. So then we come into some that I haven't talked about before. One of them being The Bridge to Terabithia. This is a novel that follows a young boy named Jess, who he has just moved into a new area and is trying to figure out life around this new phase that he's moving into. He's moving into middle school and he's 5th grade, so the end of his time. And I'm sorry, it's not him who just moves. He gets a new neighbor named Leslie, and he, at very first, the thing that really captured me in this one is the kind of inner monologue that he has over Leslie. Is Leslie a boy or a girl? Her demeanor and her clothes are kind of tomboyish. She doesn't fit the stereotypical girl on the first day of school that he expected. But Leslie kind of invites Jess into an imaginary world and helps him to really embrace his imagination. And there are parts in this book that will rip your heart out if you haven't read it or seen the movie already. But it is a great one, and it is a favorite that I love to go to. The next middle grade book that I want to talk about is Dealing with Dragons. This is one of my first escapes into fantasy. I had read The Hobbit with my class. I had read Harry Potter, the first 3 books, and then didn't know where to go next. So I went to my school library. This is 9th grade. We had a great school library at my high school. And asked the librarian, like, I loved the dragon in The Hobbit. I loved the dragons in Harry Potter. Where can I go next? And she gave me Dealing with Dragons. This is by Patricia C. Reed. This is the story of a princess who is the 7th daughter and she doesn't fit the expectations of a princess. And her whole kind of aspect, the way she approaches everything is quote unquote wrong. And so this was a great one, especially for me as a teenager when I was struggling with who I was and how I fit into the stereotypes and where I fit in my world. This gave me the kind of ability to move on past what was the expected and know that there are things that I could do that were not the expected but would still end up with good things. In this book, instead of the princess Cimarron, instead of marrying the prince, she runs away. And she runs away to a dragon's cave. The dragon Kazul kind of takes her in, and she then is pursued by knights who think that she's held captive by the dragons, when instead it was her who ran away to the dragons. This is a lot of fun. It does push those boundaries of stereotypes and what is expected. It was great. This one is one that I go back to on occasion when I need to just remember the feelings that I had as a teen and what I enjoyed and kind of getting back to my roots of who I want to be. But this was a fun one. I'm going to move to a couple young adult novels and series actually that, again, I really loved, especially as a younger reader. One of them I would not put in the hands of most teenage readers. I would wait until they were older. And that's not even true, I guess. There is one that when I put it in the hands of like my 11, almost 12-year-old, there will have to be some conversations that happen just because of the setup of the book and how the characters act. And we're going to talk about that one first. That is the Twilight series. Most of us know Twilight. It had a huge following when it came out, when the movies came out, even now, almost, or is it 20 years later? 15 years later from when the first book was written. It still has a pretty good following. But as we have hit our adult years, those of us who read it as they came out know the character flaws of the characters in here and kind of how to warn our young readers now. This follows a girl named Bella. She's just moved from Arizona to Washington to live with her dad, and finds out vampires are real and kind of falls in love with one as the story goes through. One of the major character flaws of this is that Bella is very much a doormat. She allows everyone to kind of push her around and bulldoze over her. And so when I do let my daughter read this. That will be one of those things where we'll have to have conversations about acceptable boundaries that we all need to have in relationships. This was a fun one. This I read in my early 20s, and just really had a great time with it. It's, again, as an escapist reader, it allowed me to go into a different world. Even though it's mostly a contemporary fantasy, it still allowed me that escape into the fantastical elements of vampires and everything else that the series goes throughout to talk about. I really don't have a whole lot more to add to that, just because it is such a popular book in our culture, popular movies. So just if you haven't read them before, I would recommend going into it with that openness of, this is not who we emulate our relationships after. We don't want broody guys and think that we can change who they are and make them better. And same for the other way around. We don't go into any friendship thinking that we can make someone better. But yeah, so that's kind of that one. And then the next series that I had that I loved was Aragon. I believe I've talked a little bit about this one in the past. This follows a young boy named Aragon who is raised by his uncle in this world that used to have dragon riders, and the dragon riders are no more. Aragon one day is up in the mountains and finds a gem that he quickly finds out is not a gem and instead is a dragon's egg. And he then goes on adventures with his dragon, Saphira. The next couple of books I'm going to talk about are adult books. These aren't so much rereads for me, but they are go-to areas. This first one is my go-to author when I'm kind of slumping and don't know what to pick up, and that's Colleen Hoover. This is an author who, again, there have been problematic things in the books, but I think that with conversation and talking through them, we can understand that these aren't necessarily relationships to emulate. These are not things that we want to copy in our life, but they allow us kind of to see into the eyes of others. Reminders of Him, I read last month. It follows a young woman named Kenna who is arrested and finds out that she's pregnant and loses custody of her child based on the events that sent her to prison. And this is her life kind of after she leaves prison and tries to get custody back of her daughter, and the family who's adopted her, their kind of reasons of why they don't want her anywhere around the little girl and things like that. It just kind of gives us that insight into, for this one, what life is like a little bit after you leave prison, and getting that how to overcome, or how some will overcome those hardships that come along with that painting of you're a convicted person even though you've served your time. Those prejudices that come with that. With the Colleen Hoover ones, she doesn't just cover that aspect of the after prison. She has some, like It Ends With Us, that talks about domestic abuse. She has, I'm trying to remember the ones I've read. Verity covered kind of that ghostwriter aspect of someone coming in to write for someone else, and the suspense that storyline filled. But in all of those books, there are elements of things that we look at and go, that's problematic. Yes, they're problematic. But sometimes that makes good reading. It gives us that thing that we're looking for in our reading life that will help us get out of slumps or kind of continue our reading journey. The last book I'm going to talk about is more of it's a series that I've picked up when I'm in slumps, just to give me that quick read, that quick, I already know the world, so I want something familiar enough that I'm not bogged down by all the details. I can picture these characters in my head because they're from a TV show, and it gives me that dopamine fix to get me out of the slump so that I can continue reading. And that's any of the Doctor Who books. This one is The Deviant Strain. This one is the 9th Doctor, and there's an alien species that's attacking a Soviet naval base. All of these books follow one of the Doctors and some of their companions and give a little more, a little extra side tale to what we would see in the TV series. And it just gives me that, because the world's already built, I already know the characters, I already love the characters, and want to know more about them when they're not on my TV screen. It gives me that kind of escape into a world that I kind of know, and can get that quick read and hopefully pull myself out of a slump. There you have it, friends. Those are some titles that I use to break a slump or to prevent a slump that I feel coming on. What about you? Leave me a comment below to give me some suggestions of titles that you use when you feel a slump coming on or to break a slump. That way I can add them to my list as well. If you like this video, please leave a thumbs up, and feel free to subscribe to my channel if you aren't already. I'll talk to you soon.